The room was quiet, except for the steady, mechanical hiss of the ventilator. It was a sound that swallowed all others, a constant reminder that the body in the bed was no longer functioning on its own. Angela Craig was dying, and no one could say why. For nearly 2 weeks, it had been a medical mystery. A vibrant 44-year-old mother of 6, struck down by a cascade of terrifying symptoms. Headaches that felt like ice picks. Dizziness so severe she crawled across the floor. A sudden, violent seizure that left her brain silent. The doctors at University Hospital in Aurora worked with urgent, frustrated precision. They had ruled out the usual suspects: stroke, aneurysm, infection. The tests came back normal, which was the most abnormal result of all. A healthy woman doesn't just slip into a coma. But in the intensive care unit, a different kind of suspicion was beginning to form. It started not with a test result, but with a feeling. A nurse watching the husband. He sat just outside Angela's room, a figure of quiet devastation in blue hospital scrubs. Dr. James Craig. A dentist. A father. He stared at his phone, his fingers moving slowly as he updated their children, his family, his friends. He looked like a man being slowly crushed by grief. And yet, there was a stillness to him that didn't fit. The panic, the desperate questions, the raw, messy anger at the universe, these were absent. He was calm. He was waiting. It was a subtle dissonance, a single quiet note that felt off-key in the symphony of crisis. It was enough to make a forensic nurse pick up the phone. The call to the Aurora Police Department was discreet, a professional speaking in the cool, coded language of her trade. A mandated report. Suspected poisoning. Possible cyanide. They had no proof. Only a pattern that experienced eyes knew too well. A sudden, unexplained illness. A patient who was getting worse, not better, despite all intervention. And a loved one whose performance of grief felt just a little too composed. While that call set a quiet investigation in motion, the main drama in the hallway continued. James's business partner, another dentist named Ryan Redford, arrived. He came to offer support, to stand by his friend in this unthinkable hour. He found James in the hallway, the picture of solemn endurance. They spoke in low tones. And then James stepped away to make a call. The moment he was out of earshot, Ryan Redford's posture changed. The comforting partner vanished. He moved to a nurse, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. He had a story to tell, and it couldn't wait. 2 days earlier, at their dental clinic, a curious package had arrived. Addressed to James. It had been opened by accident. Inside was a small, unassuming container. Its label bore 3 words that spelled out pure horror: potassium cyanide. James had waved it away. A misunderstanding, a strange order for a dental procedure. He'd taken the bottle, and that was that. But now, with Angela dying of unknown causes, that strange package loomed in Ryan's mind like a shadow. He told the nurse, "Cyanide. Test for it." Suddenly, the medical mystery had a possible shape. A terrifyingly deliberate one. Back in the hallway, James Craig resumed his post. He watched the medical team work to save the wife he had loved for 23 years. He texted his children to come now, to say goodbye. He was the grieving husband, the pillar of strength. But in the nerve center of the hospital, 2 separate truths were now spiraling toward each other. One was a story of tragic, random illness. The other, a whispered suspicion of something far darker. The race was no longer just to save Angela's life. It was to uncover which story was real before one of them was buried forever. The architect of this nightmare sat patiently in his blue scrubs, waiting for the outcome he had already designed. Every masterpiece begins with an idea, a vision. For James Craig, that vision arrived not in a moment of rage, but in a hotel room in Las Vegas, in the quiet afterglow of a connection that felt like destiny. It was late February, a dental conference. Among the seminars and trade shows, he met Karen. She was an orthodontist from Texas. Smart, accomplished, different from anyone else. For 3 days, they existed in a bubble. Dinners that stretched for hours. Texts that pinged deep into the night. It wasn't just an affair. It felt like a revelation. A blueprint for a new life, one of passion and intellectual partnership, unburdened by the past. He left Vegas floating. He told Karen he loved her. He told her he was getting a divorce. It was the first cornerstone of his new design. But to build that new life, he had to demolish the old one. And for that, he needed a tool. Not a blunt instrument, but something precise. Clean. Undetectable. He drove home to Colorado, to his wife of 23 years, to his 6 children, to the life he had decided was obsolete. And he sat down at a computer in the back of his dental office, in a darkened exam room, and he began to work. The search history from that computer reads like a shopping list for the abyss. It didn't start with screams. It started with quiet, clinical curiosity. How many grams of pure arsenic will kill a human? A scientific inquiry. Is arsenic detectable in an autopsy? A question of quality control. He wasn't browsing in a panic. He was researching, comparing. He pulled up a YouTube video, Top 5 Undetectable Poisons. The cheerful, algorithmic voice of the narrator listing them off like life hacks. What you do with this information is up to you. He settled on his materials. Arsenic, oleandrin, tetrahydrozoline, the active ingredient in Cyanide drops. And finally, the gold standard, potassium cyanide. Then came the procurement. With the practiced ease of a man ordering dental supplies, he navigated to chemical companies. He filled out forms. For the cyanide, he crafted a cover story worthy of a spy thriller. He emailed the supplier, claiming to be a surgeon working on craniofacial reconstruction. He needed the chemical, he wrote, to test the layering of alternative metals. The order was approved. He requested overnight shipping. He was on a schedule. With the poisons secured, he moved to the next phase, delivery. How do you get a lethal substance into someone, day after day, without raising alarm? The answer was in his own kitchen. Angela's morning routine was sacred. A workout, followed by a protein shake. James often made it for her. A loving gesture. The home security cameras, meant to keep the family safe, captured the new normal. The happy couple in their kitchen. A kiss. A laugh. Love you. And the transfer of a shaker with a pink lid from his hand to hers. He was no longer just a husband making a shake. He was a chemist preparing a dose. The container, that simple plastic bottle, became the delivery mechanism for his design. The timeline was meticulous. February 27th, the Vegas high, the first searches. March 4th, arsenic delivered to his door. March 5th, Angela returns home from a trip to visit her family. March 6th, Angela feels strangely dizzy after her morning shake. The first hospital visit. He was stress testing the materials, seeing how the body reacted. When she was sent home, undiagnosed, he refined the formula. He purchased 7 bottles of Visine. He placed the order for cyanide. The blueprint was finalized, every variable accounted for. All the while, the digital love letters to Karen flowed. Poetic, breathless messages about eternal love. And carefully crafted updates about his wife's mysterious illness. He was painting 2 portraits simultaneously. For Karen, the devoted man trapped in a tragic marriage. For the world, the concerned husband baffled by his wife's decline. In the darkened exam room, illuminated only by the glow of the monitor, James Craig wasn't a monster in his own mind. He was an architect, a solver of complex problems. The emotional problem of a wife. The logistical problem of a murder. The legal problem of getting away with it. He had drawn every line, calculated every load. All that was left was to execute the build. And in the family home, surrounded by pictures of their life together, Angela Craig took the first sip of the new formula. She felt a wave of dizziness. A funny feeling in her head. She trusted the man who handed her the glass. She was drinking from a blueprint she never knew existed. A great architect doesn't just design a building. He designs the entire experience of it. The light, the sound, the feeling it gives you. James Craig understood this. The poisoning was only the structural work. Now, he had to construct the atmosphere. The story. He built it from 2 materials, devotion and devastation. The home security cameras became his unwitting documentary crew. They captured the final, heartbreaking scenes of a happy marriage. In the days before Angela fell ill, they were seen embracing in the kitchen, sharing jokes, exchanging casual, I love yous. It was a masterclass in foreshadowing, a deliberate prologue of normalcy to make the coming tragedy seem all the more cruel and random. When the first symptoms hit, he was the picture of a proactive, caring husband. He texted updates to family, his tone a perfect blend of concern and confusion. He drove her to the ER, sat with her, advocated for her. He played the part of a man wrestling with a helpless, terrifying situation. But the cameras also caught a crack in the performance. After Angela's first discharge from the hospital, a conversation in the kitchen. Her voice, weak but sharp with a new fear. "You told them I did this to myself." The accusation hung in the air. She felt it. The shift in how the medical staff looked at her, the subtle suggestion that her illness was self-inflicted. She was being framed as unstable, a secret self-harmer, right in front of her own eyes. James's response was calm, a gentle deflection, a reminder of her past struggles. He was subtly reinforcing the narrative, not to her, but to the digital witness of the camera. He was building the alibi's foundation, a troubled wife capable of harming herself. His true performance, however, was reserved for a different audience. On his phone, in a separate digital universe, the devotion was of a different kind. While Angela lay in a hospital bed, James texted Karen. He sent updates, but they were tinged with a strange, creeping implication. "She's not feeling well again. The doctors are baffled. Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" He was gently guiding Karen to the same conclusion he was scripting for the world, that Angela was the author of her own demise. Then, on March 15th, the final act. Angela checked into University Hospital, weaker than ever. James arrived, the devoted spouse. He brought her food. He was seen on camera entering her room, then later, emerging from a bathroom near the nurse's station. In his hand was a small, oblong object. Later, investigators would freeze that frame, zoom in, and feel a chill. It had the distinct profile of a syringe. 20 minutes after that bathroom visit, he was back at Angela's bedside. He was there for less than 60 seconds before he emerged, this time with urgency, to tell the nurses his wife was in pain, that something was wrong. Moments later, the crash. The code blew. The frantic team descending, the ventilator, the descent into irreversible brain death. And where was James during this climax? He was where a grieving husband should be. Outside the room, a silent monument to shock. He texted his children the terrible news. "Come now. Mom isn't going to make it." But with his other thumb, on a different screen, he performed for his other life. He texted Karen a photo, a chilling, voyeuristic shot from the hallway, looking into the room where medical personnel fought to save his wife. The caption, "Crash. Intubated." He had a brief, quiet phone call with her from the hospital hallway, a whisper of intimacy amidst the chaos. Later, after conveying the horrific news of no brain activity to his children, he texted Karen again. He thanked her for her prayers for his family. And then, just 20 minutes after describing the moment he would have to tell his children their mother was gone, he sent another message. Simple, mundane, devastating in its timing. "What are you doing tonight?" The question hung in the digital ether, a monument to his breathtaking duality. In one reality, he was a man in the valley of death. In the other, he was a man making plans for a Friday night. He had built the perfect alibi not from lies, but from truths carefully partitioned. His genuine concern for his children's trauma, his genuine passion for Karen, his genuine presence at every step of the tragedy. He simply connected them with a story he had fabricated in the middle. The architecture was flawless. The grieving husband, the star-crossed lover, the victim of a tragic, inexplicable loss, they all existed. They just weren't the same man. The blueprint was built. The alibi was airtight. He had poured the foundation, raised the walls, and painted the interior with perfect, believable emotion. He just never considered that someone might check the building permits. Every blueprint, no matter how brilliant, has a flaw. Not a dramatic crack, but a tiny miscalculation. A load-bearing wall placed an inch off-center. A material that behaves differently under a specific, unexpected stress. For James Craig, the flaw wasn't in his planning, his procurement, or his performance. It was in his partner. Ryan Redford wasn't a detective. He was a dentist, a businessman. But he possessed a skill all good professionals have. He recognized when something didn't fit. The human jaw is a complex system. When one tooth is out of alignment, the whole system suffers. He saw a misalignment. The package of potassium cyanide delivered to their shared dental practice was that misalignment. James's explanation, a mix-up for a dental procedure, didn't hold. The procedure he described wasn't just rare, it was practically non-existent in their field. The story was a veneer, and a thin one. So when Ryan arrived at the hospital, he came with two purposes. To support his friend, yes, but also to observe. And what he saw confirmed his dread. Angela's symptoms, the sudden neurological collapse, they matched what he'd quietly looked up after that strange delivery. He made his choice. He waited for James to step away, and then he walked to a nurse. He didn't make an accusation. He presented a fact, a piece of the puzzle that didn't belong. There was cyanide. Check for it. That whisper in the hallway was the first structural stress applied to James's design. It was the reason the police were called before Angela was even gone. It was the reason the autopsy was ordered over James's objections. Ryan Redford, the man who should have been part of the facade, had quietly removed a keystone. This flaw created an opening, and into that opening stepped Detective Bobby Olson. Olson didn't see a grieving husband. She saw a problem to be reverse-engineered. Her mind worked not like an architect's, but like a demolition expert's. She didn't look for what was built. She looked for the points of weakness, the seams where the construction was thinnest. The evidence was a gift, laid out with arrogant clarity. The search history, the Amazon orders, the intercepted chemicals. It was the blueprint itself, left on the desk. James, in his confidence, had never considered someone would walk in and read it. The interrogation was not a battle of wits. It was a stress test. James sat across from Olson, polite, scared, perpetually on the verge of tears. He was playing the ultimate role, the wronged man, the confused husband, the father terrified for his children. He spoke of wanting to explain, of having answers that would make it all make sense. He radiated a sincere desperation for the truth to come out. But Olson listened to the structure of his words, not the emotion. He kept offering the promise of an explanation, but never the explanation itself. He was trying to sell her on the idea of his innocence, without providing the materials to build it. He was a man pointing to a magnificent building in the distance, saying my house is over there, while standing in an empty field. Olson applied pressure to the weak points. The poisons, the timing. He had a story for each, a deflection, a you don't understand. But the foundation was shifting beneath him. And then Olson introduced the variable his blueprint had never accounted for. The human element he couldn't control. She mentioned Karen. A microscopic flicker. A hesitation so brief, it was almost invisible. The name was a seismic charge placed at the very center of his design. Karen was the why. The beautiful, inspiring why for his new life. She was not supposed to be here, in this sterile room, part of this conversation about evidence and motive. James's performance wavered. The confident architect retreated, and the scared man peeked through. He stopped talking about answers. He started talking about an attorney. He had realized, in that moment, that Detective Olson wasn't just investigating a death. She was reading his love letters. She had found the inspirational sketch he'd drawn in the margins of his murder plan. The flaw Ryan Redford had exposed was a crack in the foundation. Detective Olson had just driven a truck right through it. The beautiful, silent structure of his alibi gave its first, almost imperceptible groan. The architect was no longer alone on the site. The inspectors had arrived, and they were asking questions he'd never written answers for. Imagine building a palace for a queen, a magnificent structure designed for her alone. You source the finest marble, sketch the grandest arches, all in her name. But you never tell her it's hers. You let her believe she's just visiting a beautiful, empty building she happened to find. That was Karen. In James Craig's design, she was the central chamber, the purpose of the whole endeavor. But she was the one person who could not know the blood-soaked concrete, the poisoned rebar that held her room aloft. When Detective Olson found Karen in her Denver hotel room, she wasn't meeting a co-conspirator. She was meeting a ghost, a woman who believed she was living a romantic drama and was about to discover it was a horror story. Olson delivered the news like a surgeon making a first, clean incision. James was in custody for homicide. The shock was absolute, visceral. It wasn't the reaction of someone caught. It was the sound of a reality shattering. The man who whispered sonnets, who promised eternal blooms, was accused of the most grotesque betrayal imaginable. And then, piece by piece, Olson laid out the true blueprint. Not the one James had sold her. The story of a lonely man trapped in a dying marriage, a wife who was unstable, a divorce that was imminent, but the real one. The searches, the purchases, the timeline where Angela's illness mapped perfectly onto the delivery of poisons. Karen listened, and you could almost hear the reassembly happening in her mind. Every text, every call, every loving promise was cast in a new, terrifying light. "Are you thinking what I'm thinking about this situation?" he had texted her when Angela first felt dizzy. Karen had thought he meant Angela was faking. He had meant she was dying. He sent her a photo from the hospital hallway, a glimpse of the crisis. It wasn't a shared moment of grief. It was a progress report. The 4,000 text messages they exchanged in 3 weeks were no longer a love story. They were a ledger. On one side, poetic devotion. "I want to forever breathe in the influence of your sweet perfume." On the other, cold, clinical updates on a wife's deterioration, each one subtly framed as the act of a self-destructive woman. He had used her as his audience, his witness, his moral compass. He had made her a silent character in his narrative, believing herself to be the heroine, when in truth, she was the final, oblivious beneficiary. The most devastating revelation was the timing. Olson showed her the messages from the day of the crash. The texts about Angela having no brain activity. The heartbreaking task of telling the children. And then, 20 minutes later, his message, "What are you doing tonight?" For Karen, that single line was the collapse of everything. It was the moment the beautiful facade he'd built for her crumbled to dust, revealing the calculated, hollow interior. Her romance was a sideshow. Her future with this man was a slot in a schedule, penciled in right after the funeral arrangements. Karen became the flaw James could never have calculated for, a credible, innocent witness to his own deception. She held up the mirror to his performance, and for the police, her horrified reflection was the most damning evidence of all. She had believed she was a load-bearing wall in his new life. In truth, she was the one who, by simply telling the truth about the fantasy he sold her, brought the entire structure down. Her testimony wasn't about motive in a legal sense. It was about psychology. It revealed the man behind the architect, a man who could compartmentalize love and death so completely that they could occupy the same breath. A man for whom other people were not souls, but components, to be cherished, used, or removed based on the needs of the design. James had built his palace for a queen who never asked for it, and when she saw the foundations, she called the police. For an architect, failure is not an end. It is a data point, a design flaw to be studied, understood, and corrected in the next iteration. The county jail was not a prison for James Craig. It was a new drafting table. His first design, the silent, untraceable poison, the grieving widower, the new life with Karen, had been rejected. The inspectors had condemned it. So, with the same quiet intensity he once applied to molding dental crowns, he began to sketch a new plan. Blueprint 2.0, the escape. If the evidence against him was a building, he would not try to demolish it head-on. He would try to subtly rewire it, to change its very purpose. His first tool was narrative. From his cell, he began telling a new story to anyone who would listen. Not to detectives, but to inmates. Angela, he claimed, was deeply troubled. She had asked him to order the poisons. She wanted to die. The containers in the house would have her fingerprints, not his. It was a tragedy, yes, but he was the victim of a wife's secret despair and a police department's rush to judgment. He found a potential draftsman in his cellmate, Nathaniel. James saw his tattoos, his history, and perceived a useful tool. He offered money, a blank check, for a simple fabrication. He needed witnesses. People who would swear they knew Angela, that she had confessed her suicidal plans to them. He even suggested they use Photoshop to create proof, old pictures of themselves with a woman they'd never met. It was audacious. He wasn't just lying. He was attempting to manufacture human beings and insert them into the past. But Nathaniel was a thief, not a murderer. He listened, and he felt a chill. This was not the talk of an innocent man. This was the sound of a mind endlessly constructing. Nathaniel became a silent observer, watching the second blueprint take shape. And the design grew more complex, more sinister. When James believed his fake witnesses were being arranged, his mind leaped ahead to the next obstacle, the people who had trapped him. He pointed them out to Nathaniel like targets on a schematic. A retired deputy sheriff who had been horrible to him. That one, he said, should be hit by a car. Make it look like an accident. Then, Detective Bobby Olson. She was the primary structural engineer of his failure. She had, in his words, stacked the deck and planted evidence. For her, the plan was more direct. A shooting. Finally, an ex-cellmate named Rodney, who he believed had betrayed an earlier version of this scheme. He was loose ends, a faulty component to be discarded. James discussed these hits with the calm specificity of a man ordering supplies. Methods. Desired outcomes. He wasn't venting rage. He was subcontracting. The most telling design, however, was reserved for his own blood. He sent a detailed letter to his eldest daughter. It contained instructions that sounded like a scene from a tech thriller. Buy a new laptop. Use it to research deepfake, artificial intelligence. The goal? To create a video. A fake video of her late mother, Angela, speaking to James, begging him to buy the poisons for her. When the fake video was perfect, she was to destroy the laptop, discover the file, and bring it to his lawyers. It would be the ultimate piece of exonerating evidence, proof the police had ignored. This was the mind of the architect, fully revealed. Faced with the immutable truth of his guilt, he did not despair. He attempted to draft an alternate reality. He sought to weaponize his daughter's grief, to use cutting-edge technology to literally resurrect his wife and make her testify in his defense. It was a plan of breathtaking, pathological manipulation. He was no longer trying to hide a crime. He was trying to edit history. But every blueprint depends on the stability of its materials. And his materials, people, began to fail. His daughter, instead of following the digital ghost hunt, brought the letter to the police. Nathaniel, wanting no part of a murder for hire, began to talk. The second blueprint, drafted with such cold innovation, was never built. It was seized upon, studied, and entered into evidence as State's Exhibit A, the mind of the defendant. It proved something far more important than his guilt in the first murder. It proved his nature. The poisoning of Angela was not a singular, monstrous lapse. It was version 1.0. The plot in jail was version 2.0. The architect's mind was a factory, and its only product was deception, designed to eliminate any obstacle in its path. He had traded a dental drill for a mouse, a syringe for a keyboard, but the purpose was the same: to reshape the world to his will, no matter the cost in human lives. The walls of his cell were the only thing he couldn't redesign. A courtroom is the ultimate inspection. It is where a society brings a structure, a story, a claim, a life, and tests it for integrity. Beam by beam, wire by wire, under the cold light of the law. The trial of James Craig was not a whodunit. The evidence was a mountain, and he stood at its base. This was a different test, a stress test of the human character. Could the architect's design withstand the weight of the truth? The prosecution presented his blueprint as a narrative. They didn't just show the poison orders. They showed the love letters to Karen that ran like a parallel script. They didn't just show the home video of him making a shake. They showed the lab result that found tetrahydrozoline in the pink-lidded shaker. They didn't just show the hospital timeline. They froze the frame of him leaving the bathroom, the shadow of a syringe in his hand. Each piece was a weight placed upon the story James had built. The story of the concerned husband, the victim of tragedy. You could hear it groan. The defense offered a counter-design. They argued the blueprint was misread. James was a serial cheater, yes, but that was his normal. He had no reason to change a system that worked for him. The life insurance? A coincidence. The searches? His wife's doing, her desperate research for a way out. They pointed to an old journal of Angela's, speaking of past pain, trying to suggest the foundation for self-harm was there. But it was a design without materials. Where was her search history for poisons? Where were the emails, the orders from her accounts? They were asking the jury to believe in a ghost building, one that left no footprint in the digital world. And then, the state introduced the second blueprint. The jailhouse plots. The hit list. The deepfake letter to his daughter. This was not evidence of the first crime, but it was the master key to the man's mind. It showed them the factory. It showed that when his first design failed, his immediate response was not grief, not remorse, but to draft a more elaborate, more violent set of plans. It revealed the architect's core principle. Any problem, whether a wife or a detective, was just a structural issue to be solved by demolition. The jury's deliberation was swift. They had toured both structures. One was built on a mountain of data, receipts, timestamps, texts, forensic matches. It was ugly, but it was solid. The other was built on air, on a story that required them to believe in a vast, unproven conspiracy led by a wife who left no trace of her own alleged plot. They returned to the courtroom. The verdict was not a single word. It was the sound of a wrecking ball. Guilty of murder in the first degree. It was the final inspection report. Condemned. In the end, the architect was sentenced to live forever in the smallest, most barren space imaginable, a life without possibility. No parole, no future drafts, no new designs. At his sentencing, his eldest daughter faced him. She spoke not of the monster, but of the stolen father. He was supposed to be my hero, she said, and instead he'll forever be the villain in my book. She was the final, human casualty of his design, a living room in the palace he destroyed. The judge imposed life, plus 33 years for the subsequent plots. The numbers were a formality. The true sentence was the utter and permanent failure of his life's work. Every pillar he had tried to erect lay in ruins. The family, obliterated by his hand. The passionate love with Karen, exposed as a sick fantasy. The professional reputation as a healer, now a punchline for evil. The fortune in life insurance, forever out of reach. His own intellect, his greatest pride, was now the definitive evidence against him. He had sought to build a new world upon a grave. Instead, he had only succeeded in digging his own. The haunting question the case leaves behind isn't about how he did it. The evidence spells that out in cold, clinical detail. The question is, what do we do when the monster isn't a snarling beast, but a quiet man with a plan? He teaches us that the most dangerous deception isn't the loud lie. It's the silent, patient, convincing construction of a false reality. It's the loving gesture that carries poison. It's the concerned update that frames a murder. It's the normalcy that hides the blueprint. James Craig's story is a chilling reminder to look not just at the beautiful facade, but at the foundations. To trust the whisper of unease. To listen to the Ryans and the Karens and the Nathans, the people who see the misalignment. Because the architects of evil rarely look like they're building a nightmare. They look like they're building a dream. And by the time you hear the structure creak, it may be too late. The site is now quiet. The tools have been taken away. All that remains is a warning, etched into the record of a terrible crime. The most perfect prison is the one you design for yourself.